power tools with no instructions. And my biggest takeaway from it was truly believing that your spouse has your best interest at heart. You know, and then also showing her that that is the case for you as well. So much so that we've challenged ourselves to say this to our wives for the next 14 days.
Yeah. And my takeaway was from the time that I can remember when we're little, we're bred to see something, a toy on a box or a power tool box or something, and be like, oh, I can use it just like that. That's what the box says. Let's do it. So we take that same approach with our marriage, not knowing that there's instructions to read, not knowing that, there may be batteries and there may be assembly required. We don't see the fine print. We just see the box and we think we can do it. And sometimes we see marriage and we just think we can jump in and it be fine. And that is not the case. So we talk about that a little bit and more. So continue to listen for the full episode. So we're talking about power tools and marriage today. And when Brian brought up the topic, it immediately had me think about when I moved into my house and we had to cut down trees. Um, so like, I'd never used a chainsaw before, right? And I was cutting with the handsaw, and my neighbor was, you know how you see neighbors, you're new and they drive up and down, and I'm sure he saw me like hacking away, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, what are you doing? Like, I have a chainsaw. Do you want to borrow it? And I'm like, yo, our neighbors are amazing. So I get this. But I don't know if you've ever used a chainsaw, Brian, but I had not up until this point.
Okay.
You see it on like, you've seen someone cut down a tree like within your neighborhood, or, when the power lines need cut or whatever, or you watch a random show. So you're like, okay, bet, pull the cord, it starts. And that's what I thought happened, which in essence it does. But mine was electrical, which I didn't know was a thing. Maybe you did, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So I start using it, and then it's not as effective as it was. So I realized that obviously it gets dull from use. And so I found out you could take it to a hardware store and they'll sharpen it and all that, which is great. But I thought that is the first thing where I thought like, oh, this is a tool, but now I know more about this than I did before because I started using it. I was in it, right?
Right.
So I'm trying to put the chain off because you have to take it off, take it to the hardware store, and then you have to put it back on. And it's not working like it was, but you have to figure out the right tension. So you have to like use a Phillip or use a flathead and do all that. And I say all this to say it's more than I thought when my neighbor was like, hey, just use this chainsaw. Because a handsaw, it is what it is. It's right there. You use your own, use your own torque, and you're good to go. And then there's also different types of chainsaws, right? I was gifted a gas chainsaw, and that's a whole nother story. You still pull the cord, but you have to put special oil in it. You have to keep it lubricated, all that stuff. So when you brought up this topic of marriage, I just thought, man, like power tools, no instructions. If you've never done something, you better read the instructions and figure out how to maintenance and keep it right. That's the only way you can use it effectively and use it as it's intended. So to bring that around to marriage, like there is many things that we don't know about marriage until we're in it. And this is kind of something we've always wanted to speak on, which is why the podcast started, right, B? So we're just going to take a little time to talk about that today.
Yeah, man. It's funny because as you were talking about your experience with the chainsaw, it got me thinking about like our childhood, right? Now, I feel like we've been groomed to kind of have this type of mindset. I see something and I've seen it done, so I must be able to do it the same way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll think about going back to when you saw a toy you really wanted. You saw the commercial on TV, right? And then now you got it for Christmas. You rip the packaging open, you see the picture on the box, and you're like, "Oh, right, I got this." Right? Like I could do this. And then you pull it out, and it's all in pieces, and you're like, Ah, man. All right. Well, let me just look at the picture on the box. I don't have any instructions.
Oh my gosh.
And
Yes.
so like now we're adults and we're like, oh, I've seen somebody use a chainsaw before. And maybe if you even go about to get one, right? Pull it out. You're like, all right, well, there's a couple things I got to put together. Not a big deal.
Right.
Let me look at the picture on the box.
We still do that. That's so true.
Right?
Oh man.
How we relate this to marriage? Like all of our lives, we've seen people in marriages. And it's like the picture on the box. Right? Which now is like Instagram.
Right. Right.
Oh, that's what marriage is. Like we're gonna travel all the time and we're have a bunch of pretty babies and it's all good. Like, yeah, I have to get married. That's like the next step in marriage, and it'll be super, super easy.
Yeah.
Got
Just look at the picture on the box. Oh my gosh. Wow, that is so true. But it's not the truth. It's true, but it's not the truth of what marriage is and how it works.
their
Wow.
life.
Man, for sure. Man, that's yeah. That hits home. Man, yeah, we were groomed because that's why we think we could pick up a chainsaw because we thought we could do that with our toys. For sure, man. That's wow. That's never hit more truth than right now in this moment.
But yeah, man. So, we were talking about preparing for marriage, right? Much like you should prepare to pick up a power tool that could, cause some bodily harm.
Right.
What are some of the things that we need to do to prepare for marriage?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to understand the gravity of marriage, which you don't really know until you're in it. But before that, I think it's try to, how do we understand the gravity of marriage? We talk to people who've been married. And a good way to do that is have premarital counseling. I think that is the first step to kind of understanding the gravity on a stronger level, because you can always talk to people that have been married and they can give you a little perspective. But in premarital counseling, it allows you to look at different stages in life and different areas that you'll need to tackle while marriage that you may not have thought of or thought of on like a surface level. But a solid premarital counselor or sessions will take you deeper into those subjects so that you can really see what you believe as an individual, and the difference in similarities, and then how you use those together as a tool to have your marriage be prosperous.
Yeah. And it's funny because you're talking about premarital counseling, right? And I see that kind of as safety precautions. If we're like really relating this to power tools, right? There are some steps you need to take first in order to make sure you're safe, right? And that's, safety glasses, gloves, and, different types of things there. But I guess if I'm trying to equate it, like, what am I keeping safe in my marriage? And it's like, if you are learning the proper tools, then you're keeping your heart safe or I guess more or less saying like you're keeping your feelings safe, right? So you're protecting yourself for the future, and not only yourself, but your wife. You're protecting your children, right? Because so much of what happens in the household, they will absorb, whether you know it or not, right? Whether you're knowingly showing them something, they are going to absorb it. And eventually they're going to spit it back to you.
Then you'll see if you like it.
Right, exactly. That'll be the moment that, will be your reckoning for what you've taught them, and then hopefully it comes up earlier so you can get it corrected. But, it could just happen in the future in their own relationships. Right. So you have to really be mindful of what you're I don't want to say what you're allowing them to see, but what you're portraying a healthy relationship should be.
Right.
Because we're not, it's gonna get, what's the word I'm looking for? Transfused into them.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's legacy is like, what are you
Yeah.
protecting? You're protecting your legacy, whether you have children or not. It's kind of, what are you leaving this world with, or the people that you come in contact with, or and even your wife, like how are you affecting her, and what she's going to put out into the world. I think that's definitely the thing about the safety instruction. If we equate that to premarital counseling and power tools, like most of the time we skim or just see that it's the safety section and we just go on to the next. Okay, so how do I use this, right? And I think a lot of people being married either are not exposed to premarital counseling or don't see the value of it. But it definitely can change your perspective on marriage for the better. So I just want to put that out there. That's one of those things we definitely skim. I mean, I do it all the time. But I don't think it should be skimmed when we're relating it to our marriage, or even once we're newly married. You may want to hop into just a marriage coaching or a marriage counseling, just to kind of see what's about to happen.
Yeah. And that's funny because I'm thinking about my history. I, for a long time, was a very avid reader of instructions. So much so that if my mother were to get a new electronic or something, she's a skimmer or just a pamphlet thrower, right? And she would just call me like, Brian, I got a new VCR. Yeah, that's how old I am. Got a new VCR. And come set this up for me. I don't know what to do. And I'm like in the back of my head thinking, well, you could know what to do. But I digress. I guess my point is, the older I get and the more experiences I have, the less I've started to read instructions. So I don't know if that really comes into play here, but I feel like it kind of does, because I've been married for 4 years now, right? I'm pushing 40 like this month.
Yep.
And so if you think about it, 35 years of witnessing other people's relationships is a long time to formulate this opinion that I should know how to do this by now.
Wow. I have never thought about that. And there's validity to that thought process, right? It's funny because a lot of times I see people are when they see couples that are young, they may say, I feel like they say they need a little bit more premarital counseling or something of that nature, because they're young, they haven't life experience. But as people get older, um, I don't hear that as much. Like if they're either getting remarried or if they just haven't been married, um, I don't see that push. But I know my wife and we push for that even more, because
Okay.
it's almost like that mindset. Like, I should know because I've had life experience, but also there's so many things you have to unlearn because you've had that life experience. Does that make sense? So you know
Yeah.
how to do you, great. So but you don't know how to do you with a person effectively if you've never been married, or if you're getting remarried, like you may know how to do it and didn't do it effectively. So my wife and I, we think we can give you tools on how to do that, how to unlearn, retrain, and how to really understand what is coming. But and validate that that's all real. Like it's both. Like I'm an
Yeah.
expert at myself, but I also need to learn how to be an expert with this new person into
Yeah.
my life integrated. So I feel what you're saying. It's valid to think that, but that might not be the healthiest to have a strong marriage.
Yeah. And I mean, that was my point, right? I had a lot to learn, but more or less just thought like, yeah, how hard could it be? Right?
For
Pick
sure,
up the box, man.
man.
Um, yeah. So I don't know if you touched on it or not, but I think we need to talk a little bit more about the behind the scenes, right? The maintenance that you don't see is very important, right? So I guess what are some of the things that you speak to couples about that they inherently are going to run into in their marriage, but may not have experienced yet, so they may not think, "Hey, I need to prepare for this."
I mean, the big things are, and most people probably understand this. Religion. Are their beliefs, spiritual beliefs? What are they? Are they the same? Are they different? Are they aligned? Even if they're the bigger broad, like if we're, um, if we're both Jewish, right? But there's different. Are we Orthodox? Are we progressive? Are we conservative? All that, right? Same with Christianity. What denomination are we? What did all that? Second would be spending habits. Like, who's a spender? Who's the saver? Are you both spenders? Are you both savers? You know, what are our habits? How are we going to communicate with that? Um, the third one that people don't really think about is the blending of families. And we generally think of blending families as someone who's had kids or has been married before. But even if you've never had kids, you're still blending two families, right?
Yeah.
You have husband's family, wife's family. You know, all those years of how you became who you are as husband, all those years of how you became who you are as wife, and how does this now work within our marriage? I think those are their main things that you think about, but you don't really think about, and you have to really figure out um, where you stand in those moments. Is there anything you think about off top um, after I said that?
Um, for me, it's something that we talk about week in and week out, but it's the importance of communication in all aspects of your marriage, right? And it's funny because it's something that I still struggle with. It's something that I'm working on consistently. So it makes me think in this moment, like, is there, because I guess because I can't necessarily see it yet, right? Is there a time when I'll finally have this down? Right. And the communication within my relationship is just so solid that it's like just not a worry anymore. Right. Which I know I can get to that point. It goes back to what we said in the a previous episode, that it's practice, right? Um, but as I'm like inching my way closer, I think maybe I'm just being impatient with it.
That's probably the case. But I think it's one of those things. If we use a sports analogy, right?
Mhm.
Basketball, right? When you first pick up a basketball, you don't really know how to dribble. But as you work on it, you can now dribble standing in place with your right hand or your dominant hand. Now you can run, take a jog, then you get to running, then full acceleration toward the basket, being able to stop, start. Once you can do that, then you develop the crossover. Then you go between the legs, then you spin, right? But it's all a progression. And no matter what level of basketball you get to, right? By the time, if you play high school basketball, you're pretty comfortable with being able to dribble a ball, right? And most people would say, oh, that's good. Those that can't do it understand, oh, it's pretty tough, right? But even from high school to college to the pros, they still work on dribbling during their time of getting better, right? So
Mhm.
it's one of those things where it's a necessity to be able to play the sport, but you still work on it even when you're a professional. You're still figuring out, how can I do this better, or how do I keep this up? So there's still work to keeping your communication at the level once you get to this air quotes arrived level, because you never really arrive because you're always trying to maintain and do your best. Does that make sense?
It makes all the sense. And it's funny because I'm thinking, like, if we go back to the beginning of, you know, picture on the box type of deal, right? Let's say you've never seen a basketball game happen before, but your dad throws you a basketball, you pick it up, and he's like, dribble it, bounce it, right? There's a difference between what your perspective is of just being able to bounce the ball and, like you're saying, the work that goes into to be able to like dribble the ball effectively. Oh, and then also do that around people. Oh, and then also get past them while they're defending you and score with the ball, right?
Mhm.
So there's steps to it, like you said. But man, like the difference of perspective, which kind of takes us back to premarital counseling and talking to other married couples, the perspective of just seeing and knowing something can happen and knowing how to make it happen
Mm, yeah.
is like the most, and why it's so important to have these conversations and to enter premarital counseling and enter it seriously and not just to check a box.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that makes sense. You can read the instructions, but if you don't put those instructions to action, then you're not going to use the tool effectively, or you can't
Right.
even put the toy together, using both of those analogies for sure.
Yeah. And
Good.
then you're wondering why you got extra pieces.
Man, that's the worst. I'm not going to tangent on that, but that's the worst.
I'm always trying to make you tangent, but um so there was another point that you brought up, which was truly believing that your spouse has your best interest at heart. Um, Now, to me, I understand, but what was it behind that thought that you wanted to portray to the listeners?
Yeah, you have to. I think starting out in your any relationship that you have, that, or especially beginning in marriage, like there's that, broadly speaking, there's like that honeymoon phase, right? Where some people don't have that, but it's basically, everything's good, rainbows and butterflies, everything's awesome. Nothing out of your spouse, the mouth of your spouse will ever hurt you. Um, until it does. And they don't agree with you, and they're a human person with flaws. But if we remember that space, that my spouse only wants the best for me, they only want to see me grow, that allows us to have grace for them in their shortcomings. That allows us to switch the perspective to know that what they're doing is not malicious, or they're not intently trying to hurt you by what they're saying or what they're doing or what their actions were. It was basically just a mistake.
Mm.
But it gives us the ability to anchor our marriage on, my spouse loves me and wants the best for me. So when they did X, they were not trying to hurt me. I need to figure out why they did X. And I also need to know how to communicate how I felt when X happened, but I don't have to do it in a hateful, vengeful way that could destroy our marriage.
Yeah, and that's so important, man. I mean, you got me thinking. When you're talking about it, maybe they just made a mistake, right? If you can reconcile that they weren't trying to hurt me, that and maybe even just in a argumentative space, maybe it's just their perspective on what's going on, right? And maybe your opinions or perspectives differ, and just having that conversation, having that open communication can maybe not always bring you to, a joint perspective, but I guess the better way to put it is an understanding of where each other's coming from, right? An understanding of oh, this is why you made that mistake, or this is why I see what you did as a mistake, right?
Right.
And I guess really seeing both sides of the coin is very important, and knowing how to have that conversation with your spouse without you know making it this huge blow up issue.
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
that's so
Yeah. It's really about, that's like the key to maintaining your communication. Like communication is paramount for your marriage, but having that perspective that your wife or your husband, your spouse, like we were saying, has your best intention, that allows your communication to be a little easier.
now I'm thinking about one of my most selfish moments, right? Could you give me some advice on when you're in that kind of space, how to overcome yourself to see your spouse in that light of, she really just wants the best for me. I need to get over myself and and move forward.
Can you say that a different way? Because I want to make sure I answer it.
Yeah,
I want to answer the question that you're asking.
right. So let's say there's an outcome to a scenario that I really want, right? And my wife's just not giving me that outcome. And I don't necessarily know how to communicate to her that, hey, these are my expectations. This is what I would like to see happen. Here's how I would like you to do it. Obviously, I'm on the other side of this.
Oh, wow.
But I'm kind of just stuck in my own head and not seeing that, her perspective is this, and I'm not seeing in the moment that she wants the best for not only me, but for her and our kids, right? Right? The
Hmm.
whole boodle. I'm just stuck on this is the result I want, and I'm not getting it. It's a lot.
That is a lot. I'm processing all of that. So you're saying, how do you grow as yourself or as the spouse in that situation?
I guess both are needed, right?
Yeah. Um, well, this I think for husband, I'm gonna say husband in this situation because it's you. Um, that is one of those where you actually haven't really considered your spouse or or said family in that way. So it's one of those, and we get stuck in that all the time. I mean, we're human, we want what we want, we see it. This would be the ideal scenario. We always want the ideal for us. um, but you have to that's when those kind of like remembering moments come back, like, okay, is this the best for everyone? What's the sacrifice that everyone has to? And I mean, this probably happened to me like 3 weeks ago. Like I was just like all about what it is for me, not considering my family, right? Um, so it's one of those you have to remember, but I'll tell you how to use it. When your spouse brings it up, if you know your spouse has your best interest in heart, when she challenges you on the selfishness of this, or that your lack of consideration, because it's not, you're not intentionally trying to be selfish, but you just did not consider your wife in that space. Because my wife had to check me the other day. She's like, you just didn't consider me.
Mm.
And let me tell you, that punch in the gut that was, and she didn't say it malicious or mean, it was the fact. She's like, I'm
Yeah.
not mad, you just didn't consider me. And like, you don't ever want to be in that space. It just kind of happens because we're human. So you have to
Right.
kind of figure out how to mitigate those. And that's kind of in your own thought process. When you see, I want what I want, and this is how I want it, you have to say, what about my wife?
Mm.
Start there before you say anyone else. What about my wife? Because sometimes she will want that how you want it, where you want it for you as well. And
Right.
she'll make the sacrifices, but you have to at least bring it back to consideration. And that's when you have to say, my spouse has my best interest in heart. But you have to say, am I portraying that I'm the same spouse and I have her best interest in heart? Not just in a conflict or an argument, but in what I want to do. And then from your spouse's perspective, she has to know that it's okay for her to say, hey, you don't have my best interest in heart right now. But I know you do, but your actions are not portraying that. So if
Right.
you can figure out, if she can figure out how to communicate with that, even though she probably already knows how to, we're the ones that don't know how to most of the time, I'll say.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But that would be how you would play both sides of the coin using the best interest in heart. Always say, I want this, but what about my wife? Or what about my spouse? And then my spouse come in and be like, hey, I know your heart is to have my best interest, but your actions are not lining up with the heart that you have.
Yeah. And that, I like that, because what I wrote down here is you have to have that idea in mind first, right? So it goes back to what we said earlier of putting yourself around other couples, premarital counseling, all those things. So someone who has the experience can plant that idea in your head, right? Because if you've never thought to yourself, my wife has my best interest at heart, you'll never be able to go back there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Had that thought, that experience. So I wonder what a good practice would be to really like bring that front of mind daily, as we were talking about, practicing these things, bringing that front of mind daily. So if you have that thought, maybe even if you wrote it down in a journal at the beginning of the day when you woke up, right? And if you were to come across a scenario at any point, be able to go back to the first thought you had of the day and just kind of like live your life out that way.
Yeah, I
Live
mean,
urgent.
yeah, I think, yeah, to get that into your mind, I think, yeah, writing it down at the beginning of the day, putting it, as a quote on your like screen on your phone, um, literally, literally saying it to your spouse as like an I love you on the way out to the store, like, I love you, I have your best interest at heart.
Hey, I'm done.
Like,
Episode over.
I I think we should do that. We should, for the next 14 days, every time we say I love you, say that on the way out the door. Say it.
Wow. Yep. I agree. Um, hey y'all, all I'm gonna say is, well, actually, by the time this episode gets out, I'll say this: we are recording this before Valentine's Day. But having this thought as that day is approaching, just sounds like an awesome idea to do it up until that day.
Yep.
Like that 14-day period, right? Man, that's a good idea. I got nothing else. Like I'm spent. I've already tossed my pen. I'm done.